are main reasons today then some of these buildings, socialist buildings, they are destroyed or are planning to be destroyed. It's not ideological, or only ideological reasons, yes. What about the material, the condition of a material from which these buildings were built? You know, there are two things, form, symbolical value of the form, ideological value of the form, and the material, which was very often very poor, and it is still in bad condition. Can it be this simple reason of the material why they are destroyed?
Yes, it can, of course, and very often it is the reason. But another problem from the architectural or artistic architectural perspective is that insulation programs very often change the initial idea, and in a way a building is repaired, it's better functionally used after renovation or insulation, but then it's not the original idea. Proportions are changed, the materials are changed, and then it's really difficult to justify why it was, for example, listed, or why it was originally very valuable as an architectural expression. It changes also. And I think the main in the field of restoration or renovation or conservation of a modernist architecture, the main discussion now is how to find the solutions to improve material condition, but not to destroy architectural expression. And there are solutions, but of course it's very individual to each building.
Anders was first.
Thank you. I have a question to Yuri. I think this issue of time is really crucial about the 80s. I think you're really onto something important there. But I want to be intentional and very polemical, and I want to ask that, do you think the 80s as such even existed? Because in a sense that we can speak about a very coherent decade like the 60s or even the 70s, then the 80s was, there was so much pressed into politically into the 80s. Like it started with the so-called developed socialism of Brezhnev, and then there was the perestroika period. At the end of the 80s, there was already coming almost to neoliberal capitalism. So how do you relate your material to these political, very, very fast, quick changes?
I think what you're referring to as complexity of the time, can you hear me? Was part of the reason I started this research. And you're quite right, it is hugely complex as a decade, it's 10 years. And I think the split, which is usually associated with 1990, or the switch over from Soviet system to market economy. There was a similar switch over bang on in the middle of the decade, which was in thinking and also in the attitude where the discourse was actually inhabited. I would say that the early 80s, it was operating almost in a negative space. And something interesting happened when the breakthrough moment was articulated, detected. There was a movement outwards. Now, Cyril Hellman has actually written about 60s being a long decade. It actually stretched over the 70s. But I think from that perspective, you could also almost say that it stretched until 1986. In that sense, the 80s became quite short. So in terms of physical artifact, the space, and that's where Torres and Karl and other writers came in. You could start detecting through actual artifacts and design object, how discourse was developed. And the time made it even crazier, because I think if you think about the broken time and the way it could be compressed and separated from different discourses and possibly separating different discussions, what happened in the 1980s, from my perspective, is an extremely compressed time. 1993, the From Dreams to Reality exhibition, actually was coming after the shock of moving into the market economy. The landscape was Wild West. There was no legislation. There was, for that really fragile discourse of own production, small-scale production, thinking about industry, found it really difficult to start operating. And actually results from that discourse emerged and materialized at the very end of the 90s. So something which was quite intense as a thought looks like it took longer to come out, just because of those material, legislative difficulties, etc. I don't know whether I answered the question, but that's my view.
Thank you. Now, Professor
Yeah.
Marija.
My question is to Marija, and it is motivated by the sheer curiosity of art historian. One of my students recently has discovered brutalist architecture during the Soviet period, yes. Therefore, is it possible to identify some different currents within this broad spectrum of the Soviet architecture in Lithuania, in Baltic countries in general? Is it possible?
I think it is. The different research shows that it is. And, I think we will have a presentation of Andres about postmodern in the Soviet or in the Soviet Baltics. And earlier it was the initial idea that it couldn't exist or couldn't exist as an irrelevant compared to the global tendencies and movements because of the different economic and political situation, and there wasn't market economy which couldn't raise the critical approach to the modernism. But the deeper and the further the research now goes, we discover all these movements, brutalist and postmodern, and I think it's a very hot topic which still is presenting new findings and positions these movements into global tendencies or global movements.
Yes, thank you. It's kind of comment also, because I think that one of the issues that you all addressed is actually how to write history of art of the Soviet time. And I think it is very hard task to do, because we don't only have this from one side, this we hate it as a political period, we long it as a cultural period, avant-garde, and we have a nostalgia because of the lost status of artists and architects and so on. But if we are aware of it, that this is already a half win, I would say. But then I think that it is very important also to think about the terms of art discourses, because I think that art discourses are something that are developing, and this development kind of stopped during the Soviet period. And we in my opinion, we see in every assessment of architects and artists of these times, what is their discourse, how they think about things. So this is historically very important to explain that. But on the other hand, of course, what we have to explain this is particularly your question, of course, how do we explain it for the contemporary audiences? I think this also has to do with this art discourse, because it is the modernist form that is still not very much appreciated. And I think this is partly an aesthetic question, really. And this is what still have to be explained along of this cultural and historical issues that are in this period. So this is very complex work, which is we have to do.
I will respond to Krista from a very short project-related perspective, and I think Marija wants to add. I entirely agree, and I think this is, for me, this is the most exciting part of it. I referred in my talk to Lost 80s, which has a title and has a provocation, and it's a project in itself. But actually what was interesting was the reverse order in terms of Estonian art historians tackling those decades. The first publication was Arrogant 90s. I think you weren't part of it, you came in for the Lost 80s version. And it was, what was interesting, Cyril Helmer, who collated the collection of papers, was actually reflecting on this and saying that what they failed to achieve was the horizontal understanding, exactly what Chris is talking about, the connectivity between different discourses. And I think this is the really critical aspect of it. Unfortunately, what happened, then Lost 80s was published afterwards. And the same pattern emerged from that publication, so that digging in was vertical rather than horizontal. And I agree with Chris that there's a massive potential in methodology.
I would probably comment, I completely agree with Krista's comment, but to develop it more, probably also to Professor Klavin's question, it is, yes, it is very important, because the initial critical approach to all these movements and socialist, modernism, postmodernism, brutalism, all these events, was that it was formal. Very formal, without the intellectual background that existed in the West, or the intellectual background understood differently or wrongly or in different ways, and it was just formal. But now, when we try to understand how the creators of this period perceived it and intellectually perceived it, and now we present, so it's this dual investigation, I think, might change a lot, and especially with those late Soviet period art discourses.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay, then I have a question, Ieva. You were presenting very interesting examples of Latvian and other Soviet artists, of this visionary art, this techno-driven art. And you mentioned that in Western world, this techno-driven art was criticized as uncritically techno-orientated, utopian, with some utopias. How it was in Eastern part? Can we also be critical that we also were uncritically techno-driven? And if so, if we also had somehow similar positions, then maybe we can talk that it's not about Cold War. It's not about capitalism and socialism as opposing systems, but that these artists of this visionary art, in both sides we were dealing with modernism, with late modernity, with the fate of late modernity, and it somehow changes or can change our perspective of investigation.
Yeah, thank you for this question. Of course, in my presentation I could just very briefly kind of just to run over this really very interesting and very dense theme. On one hand, the ones were about this, but then there were also like afterwards critical reflections that definitely were, and that makes extremely interesting also dialogue between also like decades or different generations. Like in the 80s, for example, I can refer to on the local scene that architect and theoretician Hardy Sledich, who was proponing and really very enthusiastically bringing the ideas about the postmodernism. His reflection very much also was in opposition with this 70s modernism, also this belief and naivety in a way of this technological progress, and he was through his voice in a way appeared this very different approach, and also maybe already the next generation's view, which rather was for different context. And but on the other hand, as the circumstances in Soviet Union, of course, were quite different from the Western side, then particularly because of this criticality, which was so limited, and also like they couldn't appear a critical voice during that time, like 70s, which was happening in the Western scene. And but of course, it is very complex. There are a lot of layers. Like also the artists I was mentioning, there was some criticism coming also from their own works, and it's of course interesting to see the work in a time perspective, how enthusiastic they are at the beginning, and like in the later works they also already are more also critical or ambiguous about all this belief.
Thank you.